So we have about 35 interns overall at Sealaska, and we had a smaller group of them here on Prince of Wales Island for about a week. We have a bit of a mix, so some are going international for their internships, others have come from Prince of Wales Island. We wanted them to really get a sense of what's going on in our smaller communities and how internships even over in the UK can still impact what is going on here in smaller communities. Sealaska's internship program opens so many doors for people who are looking to get into so many different fields. Even just this last week with our interns, we had them out in the woods doing stream restorations and projects that are happening in the community. If you want to do marketing, communications, things that are a little bit more in the office, those are open to you as well.
Coming to Prince of Wales was really amazing. I was able to meet my family and be a part of our culture camp in Kasan, and being able to experience that and see the totems from Old Kasan and the longhouse, and just being there with my family and the other interns and sharing that with them and being able to just learn about that and be connected with them again was truly amazing.
I have really only been to Southeast Alaska once in my life, and so it's been really nice to come back and learn a lot more from the land and the people and just have cultural experiences and learn more than I ever could from afar. It was really nice to come to Prince of Wales because my family is from Kawak, but I've never been here before. And so it was really nice to learn more from the land, from like going to the AYS salmon habitat rehabilitation to even just being here next to the ocean. And I've just learned so much in this internship, even more than I thought I would.
If I had to describe my internship in one word, I would say powerful. Being here in Prince of Wales for these past few days has been super powerful in connecting me back to my culture. Every time I leave and go to college, I feel like I get really disconnected. So coming here has really just reignited that flame and my identity to who I am. My favorite part about this trip was going to Kasan, and it was really just truly an awesome experience to have everyone so involved and so proud of their culture.
For the interns that have come from these smaller communities, having them here helps highlight the doors that have opened for them by joining Sealaska's internship program. It's just a wonderful opportunity.
Visit mysealaska.com/opportunities for more information.
Well, how cool is that? When I was an intern many, many years ago in the accounting department, I don't think we left Juneau. Pretty sure I never got to do anything that amazing. And hearing about our youth connecting to their homelands for the first time got me a little emotional, I have to say. So Hala Gunashish Chinan, thanks to Sealaska and all the leadership who thought of that and who brought our interns back to Prince of Wales Island. In Gasaan and Tlawak and all the amazing places on POW, which is the best place in all of Southeast, I just have to say. I'm being biased because that's where I'm from. But Hala for joining this public policy update. We've been holding these for a little while now, and just an opportunity for us to notify and give word to our shareholders of everything that's going on. The Hucksta Committee, or the Naktuat Waiwa Committee, was formed a few years ago now as a direct result from hearing from our shareholders. You folks are telling us that it's important for Sealaska to stand up for our ways of life. It's important for Sealaska to stand up for our people in policy spaces where oftentimes our people cannot reach. And that's exactly what we're doing. And this is our opportunity to share that with you and hopefully hear from you some of the priorities that you think that we should be also considering and thinking about. I see, and I've been monitoring the chat here, and there's so many of you from all over the United States. And I just want to say, Hala, for your willingness to join us on my lunch hour here in Alaska, it's noon, or whatever time you may be sitting in throughout the country. I want to also acknowledge and kick off by acknowledging that one of our sisters in this work, Representative Mary Paltola, lost somebody dear to her. And us Haida, Tlingit, and Tsimshian people are lifting her up in this time. Cannot imagine what she is going through, let alone what it takes to experience something like that, but then continue to lead the state of Alaska in transitions that we know are necessary. So we want to uplift her and know that the Haida, Tlingit, and Tsimshian people are with her during this time. Dalang hadala is, atlant is, asti gudunai lagang. Good people, it's an honor to be with you. Frances Demert Peel, Dinan Uijan. Frances Demert Peel was my grandmother. She was from Hiktahunglai or Heidelberg. Ilskade, Sandra Demert, Di Au Uijang. Ilskade, or Sandra Demert, is my mother. Ken Johnson, Di Had Uijang. Ken Johnson is my father. He is Atna Athabaskan and comes from Chestachina. Wafal Gidak Hinudi Kiang. My name is Wafal Gidak. Hani Shnishna Hinudi Kiang. My Atna name is Hani Shnishna. Galyalast Gust Udi Kwalangang. I am of the Raven Moiety. Diyak Jan Gagang. I am a woman of the Middletown people. Barbara Blake Atsatai Hinudi Kiang. Barbara Blake is my English name. Hiktahunglai Ush Ijang. I come from Hiktahunglai. Honored to join all of you from Santa Kahini. We want to say Gunish Chish to the Akwan, and we respectfully acknowledge the Akwan, the Tlingit people, as the original owners and inhabitants of the Juneau area, otherwise known as Santa Kahini. We also want to say Gunish Chish to the Takukwan, the Tlingit people whose ancestral homelands surround the Taku River and the southern area of Douglas Island, which today is part of the city and borough of Juneau. And Gunish Chish to all of you, our Haida, Tlingit, and Tsimshian people. We are the original caretakers, stewards, owners, and inhabitants of Southeast Alaska. And I want to acknowledge all of you, because if it hadn't been for our ancestors, no one would be here right now. This place wouldn't be what it is today. And I want to acknowledge and lift up all of the caretaking and all the love and stewardship that our ancestors had engaged in and were a part of to care for this place that we call home. So today we've got quite a bit to cover because Sealaska has been doing a lot. We're going to cover some of the state and local public policy updates, talk about some of the federal legislation, federal laws, and other components of federal policy that we have been involved in, and then talk about what's next. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions. So don't forget about the chat box there on My Sealaska, and let us know if there's some thoughts that you have, whether they be questions or just ideas that you have thought of. I want to recognize the individuals who join us today in speaking. Chatla Nicole Hollingstad, one of our Sealaska Board of Directors, as well as Kajuhin, who is Jaylene Kukesh, who is one of our vice presidents and in charge of all of the policy, moving all that stuff forward. And I also want to acknowledge Tinashe Watt, Dixie Hutchinson, for her work on these live streams. She puts them together every few months for us and makes sure that we're all lined up and we know what's going on and we know how to do this. So Hala Gunishish, Dixie, Tinashe Watt, for your good thinking and all that you do for this. Okay, and with that, we are going to turn it over to Jaylene, who's going to walk us through some of the policy efforts in an overview.
Hello, everybody. So good to be here. Happy to be able to share some of our efforts that we do on behalf of all of you, our shareholders, and all of our communities. First off, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jaylene Kukesh. Kajuhain, Yuchatdu Asaf. I have the name of Kajuhain. I also have the name of Kinaguat, both Klinedi, dog salmon names. I'm Klinedi from Angoon, from the Central House. I'm also a child of the brown bear, the Tekwedi. My father was the late Albert Kukesh, Senator Albert Kukesh. My mother is also, she's living in Angoon and has been there for over 50 years, but she's actually Koyakan Athabaskan from Tanana, Rampart, and Manly Hot Springs. But I grew up and was born and raised in Southeast, and I've been with Sealaska for 15 years. In my role, I support this committee in the advocacy efforts around our public policy priorities. And it's just a very rewarding job that I do on behalf of all of you. And I have the opportunity to work with one of the committee members who's here today, in addition to Waflagidak Chakla, Nicole Hollingstad. So I'm going to start. Well, Nicole, why don't you introduce yourself, and then I'll ask you a few questions, if that's okay.
That sounds good. Thank you, Kajihin. My English name is Nicole Hollingstad. My Tlingit name is Chakla, which means Mother Eagle. Chakla yuchat doasal. Yech ayahat. Tachtain ton nakat seti. Sakwedi yadi ayahat. Norwegian yadi ayahat. I was born and raised in Petersburg, Alaska, which is one of our 5 landless communities, and we'll talk about that in a minute. My parents were Luella Nicholson, which is where my Norwegian comes from, and Casper Hollingstad Jr. of Petersburg. My Tlingit grandparents were Amy Yakyedi Hollingstad, who was just a fierce champion for Native rights and a very large figure and influence in my own life, and Casper Hollingstad Sr. I'm joining today, I'm zooming in from the lands of the Dina Aina here in Anchorage, and want to acknowledge their lands that I am blessed to be a part of here. I was Sealaska's vice president and corporate secretary for 11 years, and have been really honored to have been elected by our shareholders to serve on Sealaska's board since 2018. I chair Sealaska's governance committee, but I'm also a member of this policy committee. And Wathlogadak mentioned that, we gave it the Tlingit Haida and Tsimshian name for "Let's Go," because there's so much work to do on the policy front. So that's my introduction, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicole. So pretty frequently I get asked the question, how does the board or how does Sealaska define or decide upon its public policy priorities? So I'm wondering if you as a committee member, Nicole, can share with shareholders how Sealaska prioritizes public policy and advocacy efforts.
Yeah, we have about 75 viewers who have joined us so far. Thank you so much for tuning in for a policy update. Our shareholders think of Sealaska, and a lot of times they think of our companies and our operations, the benefits that we flow back to shareholders, distributions, internships, scholarships, shareholder development programs. You don't always think about the policy work, the sort of behind the scenes, very important involvement in legislation, advocacy, and policy that Sealaska needs to be involved in. The way that we create those priorities aligns very much with the values that we carry as Native peoples, as the Tsimshian Haida and Tlingits, who are the owners of Sealaska. And so we track our policy work on a dashboard that keeps our work organized. Kajuhain, Jaylene does an excellent job of tracking that for us. And that dashboard is organized according to priorities, again, that follow our values. So we organize our policy work according to lands, waters, our foods, culture and language, and then another category that captures anything from what kind of federal funding might be flowing to our region or to our people, legislation happening on other issues like child welfare that might have an impact that we want to make sure that we follow. So we set our policy priorities according to those values, and then we work hard all year long to track our progress. And then each year, we reanalyze those priorities and make sure that we're still doing good work in the direction and the areas that our shareholders have communicated to us, and where we need to keep an eye on activity to make sure that we can continue to represent our shareholders and provide those benefits.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. Can you also share how Sealaska is helping our communities and our partners with their policy efforts?
Yeah. You know, we know that our organizations, our people, our corporations, our tribes, our partners, we need to work together in order to push our progress forward, to try to make sure that our voices are represented. Like Wathlogadoc said at the beginning, you know, policy is one of those areas where having that input, being able to help shape the legislation that impacts us every day, all of that is so important. And we've got wonderful partners that we work with on policy. The Sealaska Heritage Institute, Spruce Root, an affiliate of Sealaska, the Southeast Sustainable Partnership. We work with Rasmussen Foundation, with First Alaskans Institute, of course, with Tlingit and Haida, with our own tribal entities in the region, with our village and urban corporations. So there's a very broad network of partners who we work with, talk with, collaborate with, and make sure that our priorities continue to get pushed forward. As far as outreach and collaboration, Sealaska just makes a tremendous effort to reach out, to be involved, and especially to listen to our communities in the region. We meet with the tribal leaders, we meet with our fellow corporation leadership. For example, most recently, we have a natural subsidiaries governing body, Ha'ani, that helps manage Sealaska's natural resources. And when it meets quarterly, we try to have that meeting in a community in our region. The most recent Ha'ani meeting was in Cake, and we had the chance to talk with Cake Tribal, other leaders, the municipality, the corporation, to listen to what their policy needs were, to contribute where it's appropriate for Sealaska, and just to keep amplifying, to keep building the strength together of our voices for funding, for municipal and state decisions that affect us, and then especially for federal legislation. We also have throughout the year opportunities to meet with communities, to meet with our shareholders and to get feedback. We have a series of meetings that are launching in the lower 48. And I want to make a special note here that Sealaska's website has an events link. And that's really important for shareholders to be aware of, and hopefully go visit. If you're on My Sealaska right now, maybe you'll grab your device and go check Sealaska's website and click on that events page. It will show you, and you should be able to see it on screen here, some of the upcoming events that Sealaska has, so that you're aware of where we're going to be, the dates and times, the communities that we're going to be in. We would love to see you there. When we visit these communities, we have the opportunity to talk, share concerns, ideas, and issues. Many of these are save the date. We want to make sure that we notify you well in advance of where we're going to be. You can also click on the events archive and go back to some events that maybe you missed, that we had a chance to broadcast or record, and you can go catch up on any discussion that you were interested in that you might have had the chance, not have had the chance to join us. So we just have a variety of efforts to stay in touch, Another example is the visits that our representatives take to Washington, D.C. for the landless effort. And when I say representatives, I mean representatives from those 5 communities who were left out of ANCSA in 1971. That would be Teneke, Haines, Petersburg, Wrangell, and Ketchikan. So we're still seeking our recognition under ANCSA to receive that township of land that every other community received. These 5 communities would be able then to set up their own urban corporation under ANCSA. And we're really trying to rectify the fact that they were left out so many years ago. So those are just some examples of how we communicate what our policy priorities are, discuss with others what their needs are, how we can partner best, and stay in touch with all of our shareholders. So from there, with that grounding of how we set our priorities and all of the ways we communicate and collaborate with partners, I'll go ahead and turn it back to Jaylene for more policy work information.
Great, thank you. I'm actually going to hand it back to our fearless leader here, Wahlagidak, who is the chair of our committee, to give a few additional highlights, and then I'll give some more updates a little bit later.
Yeah, goodness, sheesh, ladies. Part of the beauty of the Hucksta committee, the policy committee, is that so many who are a part of it work in the space of policy and know and have to be in and amongst our communities and our people on a daily basis and hear from them, see through our own eyes what is taking place and what we need to focus on. And I'm just so thankful to be able to serve with everybody, because it makes a difference when we're out there and we see firsthand the harm that is consistently being brought to our community and our doorstep and is harming our communities and our peoples. So I appreciate all of your voices in that space to continuously show us and let us know what we need to be focusing on. And our communities, all of you who are on the Zoom right now, if you haven't, please weigh in on some of your thoughts, some of your questions, some of your ideas for some of the things that Sealaska should be considering as we're moving forward with our policy work. Because not everybody is a policy expert and not everybody should be. But if you let us know, we can at least look at and see through our own policy, framework. All of us went to school in one way or another for this work. We've worked in this space for a number of years, and we can navigate the system in a way that hopefully helps our people and our communities. And so I just want to say that, we continuously do this work. And as an example of what this work looks like, our CEO, Anthony Malott, sat down with Samuel Haratzaka, who is the, for better or worse, for lack of a better word, I'll say, the native advisor to U.S. Representative Mary Peltola. And Samuel and our CEO and Mary Peltola got a chance to jump onto Sealaska lands and talk about things that we care about when it comes to our lands or the lands that the U.S. Forest Service has held on to, that we still consider our lands in terms of our responsibility and what we know is our obligation to care for those lands. And so they got a chance to jump into our homeland and have a conversation on what it looks like to map out our monumental trees. What does it look like to identify, because we've done a lot of work on our own lands, but it's really important that the Forest Service upholds their end of the obligation as well. They have a trust responsibility to our tribes. They have a trust responsibility to our people as a result of that, to ensure that we still have access to our own homelands. And that's the U.S. Forest Service's obligation. And I'm thankful that our CEO was in that conversation with U.S. Representative Mary Peltola to talk about what that looked like. Samuel stayed with me after that trip here at my house in Juneau, because when he passes through, this is his sleepover spot. And he was having a conversation with me and my husband about how he said, "You were right about Prince of Wales. It is absolutely beautiful." So he really just loved it. Go ahead, Nicole.
Oh, I was just going to say earlier, you said it's just the most beautiful place. And I think everybody would want to chime in and say, well, their community is in the running for sure.
Right.
But Prince of Wales pride runs deep. That's for sure.
Yeah, big time. So thanks, thanks for that. Just a fun little moment for all of us. I know that we've always held our own loyalties to our homelands, and that's why it's so important for us to continue to uplift what that policy looks like and how that shapes out for our people and our communities. Speaking of which, this is a subject, Nicole, you know so much about, but one of the priorities that we're constantly in conversation with our congressional delegation about is our land length. We have 5 communities that were promised something over 50 years ago. 5 communities that were promised to make it right in future legislation that they would be eventually get their land. And those 5 communities are still waiting 50 years later. Sealaska is involved in those conversations and has done a lot of work helping to get these 5 communities their land: Tenakee, Haines, Petersburg, Ketchikan, and Wrangell. My mom, I inherited landless shares. My grandma and my grandfather are both, no longer with us. Both had landless shares because they lived in Ketchikan at the time ANCSA was signed. So know the importance of this and what it means to our people and what it means to our communities, and know that Sealaska is not sleeping on the job here. I can tell you that every single Sealaska meeting that we have, there's an update on what has been done, on what conversations have been had, and helping to uplift the voices of our people to also be in those spaces, those who are, firsthand experiencing what it's felt like to watch people pass away who never saw that come to fruition, who never saw that made right by our Congress. And so that continues to be one of the priorities on our list. And Jaylene, Nicole, Richard Reinhardt, others in our staff, and other folks in our communities continue to fight that battle. And the monumental trees, when it comes to the Forest Service, they've never done a holistic, just mapping out, what are your monumental trees? Where are our trees for continued use for our cultural continuity? When it comes to our totem poles, when it comes to our historic understanding of canoe building, traditionally, all of this is important. And yes, we have them on Sealaska lands. We've scoured and we continue to look throughout our entire land base to make sure that we're identifying every single one of those trees that our people can use and be able to access, so that we can continue our culture. We can pass on from generation to generation the importance of who we are. And it's really important that the U.S. Forest Service upholds their end of the obligation as well, in that trust responsibility of making sure that they are also not preventing access to our homelands or to our own forests through not doing their job and not uplifting their end of the bargain. And we've also, on that note, been looking for opportunities for successful sound investments on the Sealaska side that also includes #landback. We see Tlingit and Haida is doing it. We see Search is doing it. We see our organizations on a trajectory for land back, but that also make feasible sense for our corporation. And so what does that look like for us? And we've been on that trajectory to figure that out and to identify what that path looks like for Sealaska Corporation to get our land back. My brother keeps texting me all of these articles about how, as the lower 48 continues to experience all the hardships when it comes to climate change, more people are moving to Alaska. And so we started looking for land on Prince of Wales Island. And as we were looking for land, my brother wants to move back after his service is concluded in the military. And we were talking with one of our relatives who happens to be a real estate agent. She said during the pandemic, people from all over the United States bought up almost all of the land on Prince of Wales Island, like the available land. People who are not our people from, California, people from Wisconsin, all over the United States, buying up tracts of our land because they see the value that it's going to bring them. And so it's really important that Sealaska also think about what that trajectory looks like for us, knowing that we have the resources to be able to invest in our own homelands. And on that continued fight for land priorities, our tribes are pushing for land into trust. give them the same acknowledgement that the lower 48 tribes have. And as they're moving these priorities forward, it's really been a contentious issue at the federal level. The state of Alaska continues to object to tribes putting land to trust. And so know that Sealaska is not just sitting idly by on that Jaylene and her team are doing what they can to support our tribes as they fight the state of Alaska or fight the federal government to be fully recognized, to have our tribes fully recognized the same that lower 48 tribes are recognized. And so know that that's a continued priority that Sealaska is focused on. And when it comes to our ways of life and our communities, know that when I say our ways of life, in my mind, subsistence doesn't do it. It's more than that. It's who we are. It's everything, our spirituality, our connectedness, our intergenerational passage of knowledge. It's so much more than just catching a fish. And so Sealaska has prioritized our ways of life and protection of our ways of life by uplifting and supporting multiple different entities throughout our state, but most importantly here in Southeast, who are working in the space of protecting our ways of life, and has lent their knowledge, expertise to the continued litigation in Sitka around the herring. Thanks to Jaylene and her team for continuing to support that litigation to ensure that our herring row is protected, that passage of knowledge does not end with our generation, that we continue to have those non-human relatives protected for future generations. And so know that we are a part of that conversation, will continue to be, and will continue to support where it makes sense for Sealaska. And then also for our communities like Cake. Cake has also been in litigation. Sealaska has been in support of their litigation when it comes to their ability to hunt in their homelands. And so that is a constant point of contention with the state of Alaska and our Native people, and Sealaska has also been a part of that. And then most recently helping Cake with, I don't know how many of you know, but their school that's been condemned for a while, that's been sitting there all boarded up. I don't know how many of you have been to Cake recently, but it's been boarded up because there's asbestos all over that school, and it's been a really expensive track to try and get that school demolished. But Sealaska has been working with the federal government to get some, is it EPA dollars, Jaylene? Some EPA dollars over to Cake so that they can work towards demolishing that school so nobody gets hurt, and that asbestos-ridden building doesn't just sit in the heart of their community. So I'm just thankful that we continue to be and focus on all of those priorities that our communities that our communities need and care about. Okay, that was a lot. And so I'll pass it over to you, Jaylene, to talk about federal and state priorities.
Great. And there's more. We could spend days on this. So I'll do my best to at least highlight a few things. I'm actually going to start with a little bit more on protecting our way of life. It's such an important thing. It's also known as subsistence to federal regulators and state regulators. But for us, it's our way of life because it's so much more than as Wahlagidak sustenance and food. It's about the process, the cultural process of gathering, of putting our food up, smoking our fish. It's a process that is so ingrained in who we are as Native people that it's when we talk about subsistence to others, for us, it's protecting our way of life. So we do support litigation efforts that are out there right now. As Wahlagidak said, we do work with the Cake, the challenge that was made to the Federal Subsistence Board for their ability to have an emergency hunt. We support the herring. We also most recently are supporting efforts of the Alaska Federation of Natives and other Native entities who are intervening in or supporting through amicus the challenge that the state has made on, or the federal government has made on the Kuskokwim litigation. The federal government is challenging the federal government or state government's poor management of the Kuskokwim fisheries. But the way the state is pursuing this, it would overturn Katie John, which is important case law that protects our subsistence priority in Alaska. And so we are engaging in that as well. so happy to continue to do work in that arena with this committee and with all of our partners. Another thing that we're doing in coordination with other partners, especially our sister regional corporations and village corporations, is we've met regularly over the past 6 months to define some areas related to the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act where amendments would be in order. Over the past 52 years, there have been several amendments to ANCSA. It is a living, breathing document that has required amendments many times, and we continue to have common areas where we see there is a need for amendments to ANCSA. So we are working on pulling together an ANCSA omnibus legislation with our Alaska delegation to try to fix some of these problems we see with ANCSA over the years. So that is another thing to watch for in the coming year. We are also watching very closely the reauthorization of the Farm Bill in the United States Congress. The Farm Bill is a large piece of legislation. It's important to us because there are many sources of funding included within the Farm Bill that benefit our region. We have these community partnerships with CAKE, with CLOAC, with HUNA that receive funding through the NRCS, which is an agency within the USDA. So there are funding opportunities that come through the Farm Bill that are critical to our rural communities and to our tribes and to our village corporations. So that is another thing we're watching very closely to make sure that there are funding opportunities that include our communities. We also work in the state area. There are things that the legislature addresses that are so important to our communities, in particular, funding for the Alaska Marine Highway, funding for power cost equalization and new energy projects. We also want to make sure we're staying engaged with the Dunleavy administration in their efforts to protect states' rights. Protecting states' rights is not necessarily a bad thing on its own, but when it does impact some of our native rights and our native priorities, and we do want to be engaged and make sure some of those efforts don't harm our people and our priorities. So those are some of the things we continue to work on. Obviously, I just want to again put another plug out there for our efforts around the landless legislation. Encourage all of you to go to withoutland.org. Withoutland.org. It is a website that our 5 communities have established together with their coalition to make sure that everyone is engaged, knows what the maps include for the land selections, knows how they can provide support for this effort by writing to their own members of Congress. If you're not in Alaska, we have shareholders in all 50 states. So we encourage you to reach out to your own members of Congress to support this legislation. Again, withoutland.org. So I know we have questions coming in. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole to help us, I guess, administer some of these questions. Again, this is just a highlight of some of the things we're working on. There's so much more. We could be on here every day for this whole week and probably still not cover it, but we do want to keep our shareholders informed, and we do want you to go to the platform on our website to continue to stay updated on our efforts. So thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it over to Nicole, and I'm available to continue to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Jaylene. It is fantastic to see the engagement that we're getting in the chat function of this online event today. And we really appreciate the involvement and the engagement of our shareholders with Sealaska. You know, when people ask the board or we discuss it in the boardroom, 100 years from now, what is an important priority? What always rises to the top is making sure that Sealaska's shareholders are still engaged with the corporation, that they participate, that they're interested, that they understand as owners of Sealaska, that they have that important voice, and that we want to hear and engage and have conversations with our shareholders regularly. So I'll take a first run at some of the questions that we've gotten, and then we'll continue to try to answer as many as we can in the time that we have together. I will start and talk about some of what Sealaska does with its lands management. We did have a question about monumental trees, those vitally important trees for our culture, for our totems and our canoes. And yes, we have always had the practice in when Sealaska was harvesting its timber to mark those trees for cultural purposes. That has always been a priority for our timber harvest. The same with trees that host eagle nests. Those have always been protected. The things that are important to us culturally, spiritually, those have always been maintained as land management practices. We were asked a question too about Sealaska's withdrawal from the timber industry in Southeast and how we're trying to support communities, principally on Prince of Wales, that were impacted by that. And we have had really focused work with our partners with Spruce Root and Southeast Sustainable Partnership to develop basically work and job development centers on Prince of Wales, make sure that people know that they have opportunities transitioning out of timber careers into work that still takes advantage of all of those skills of being in our forests and understanding our lands, transitioning perhaps into the Indigenous Guardians Network to become monitors of some of our lands and changes that are happening. So Sealaska has worked really hard with leadership on Prince of Wales to provide job transition and employment development opportunities for folks who were impacted by that. So those are some of the questions that we were asked pertaining to, water management. We always get asked a question, and I often have conversations on Facebook with some of our shareholders about trawler bycatch. Very important issue. And I want to point out that Sealaska, in our fish processing businesses, we do not engage in the state of Alaska with any trawler bycatch whatsoever. Our fish is longline caught, and that's the harvesting method that we use. And even in Europe, our Northern European fish processing has very high standards about bycatch. In fact, the market in Europe is so robust for marine life, for fish products. There is no bycatch category. All of that fish has a market, and all of it is provided at a competitive market price for fishermen there who engage very much like fishermen here. It's a family practice. It's something that they've been doing for generations. And Sealaska wants to do what we can to make sure that there are competitive market prices for sustainably harvested foods. So those are some of the questions that we had, and I hope I've tried to answer some of those. Let's go to an important issue. We talked about how important it is to have voices at the table. We just want to highlight that there's an advisory board position on the Northwest Fishery Commission. Wathlagadoc might have more information about that. Sealaska doesn't have a particular person that we're supporting right now, but it is so important for that rural and native voice to be present on that board. So maybe we'll start there. We'll pass off to Wathlagadoc about some of our fisheries policies. And then Jaylene, maybe we can revisit some ANCSA amendments. Wathlagadoc?
Yeah, goodness, Tish. So the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council does have an advisory panel position open. It is a tribal seat. Last year during AFN, the AFN Southeast Caucus all rallied around Shawan Jackson Gamble for that seat. And he, as you say, Clarice has since resigned. And so we've been asking our Protecting Our Ways of Life working group, which is made up of tribes, corps, nonprofits from throughout the state, if they have any plan to put somebody forward, because we're waiting. And we've also been asking our own people, are you interested in this? Is this something that you could get Tlingit and Haida or your local tribe to endorse you in this role, because it does need to be a tribal designation. And so as soon as we hear somebody, maybe Clarice, maybe you want to do it, I don't know, but it's definitely something that we need to put forward our support for. And as soon as we hear of somebody who we can agree on that is a viable candidate for that seat and who will do a good job representing the Native voice, the tribal voice at the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council, will be right there and ready to support that person. But as of today, I haven't heard of anybody, and I continue to ask. So if you know folks who would be good, please let us know, because I know that there's some voices out there. There's people who pay attention to that process, and just let us know what you might be thinking. And if I could, I just wanted to address one additional comment from Monaco. You know, a while ago, we were working really hard to support baby bambino foods, which kind of sounds silly. Like, why would Sealaska be supporting baby food legislation? It was to put baby bambino foods into the WIC program, which is the Women, Infant, Children program, which is if you're a low-income mother, expectant mother, you get food vouchers to go and purchase things at the grocery store. And it was to put baby bambino foods into that program. And why is that important? Because Baby Bambino believes that if we introduce the nutrients of fish to kids early, and to babies, especially early on, that they'll grow into that taste as they become adults, and then they'll be food consumers. And it's important that we get them, because a lot of kids, not our kids all love fish, right? Like, that's different. But a lot of kids in the United States aren't raised with fish. And so they have a bad taste for it. And then they don't become consumers, and then they don't eat fish. And then they just want beef or chicken or pork. And so how do we get them wanting to consume these things early on? And so we supported that legislation, and Jaylene worked really hard in Congress, making sure our delegation and other members of Congress knew that we were in support of that. And it didn't pass. I'm pretty sure it passed, but yeah.
Well, Gadak, if I can, I also want to add to Monica's question about, how Sealaska supported policy that improves its businesses. We're always keeping an eye on things like the federal 8A program. And, a few years ago, there was a very strong congressional effort to try to dismantle that program. And Sealaska was on the forefront of gathering information and providing the data that Congress needed to understand that benefit is recognized because we are political entities. We are tribal nations who have citizens, and then through our corporate structure in Alaska, shareholders who benefit from those programs, and how important it is to protect them. We worked with NACA, the Native American Contractors Association, to make sure that program still exists and that we have access to that. So that's just another example that I wanted to highlight. Thanks, Watlagadak.
Maybe while there's a pause, MMPA and blood quantum is a tough one. Unfortunately, what is taking place in that space is that the Native communities of, Alaska are not united on what that should look like. And essentially, Congress, those in charge of the Marine Mammal Protection Act, sorry, I'll say that out for folks, MMPA, that's what that acronym stands for, want us to be united in that approach. And so while we would love, as Southeast folks and Haida, Tlingit, and Tsimshian people, to maybe do away with blood quantum, some of our other relatives throughout the state do not want that. Our North Slope folks who are, the Utqiagvik, Inupiaq folks, Inuit up there are highly against removing the blood quantum. They don't want to see that, whereas some of our Sugpiaq friends and relatives over on Kodiak Island are all for removing blood quantum. And so it is definitely a divided issue, and one that makes it really hard to advocate for one thing or another. And so, in terms of what can be done, it really requires our people coming together and coming up with a solution that we can all agree on. And that means all of our people across the state, not just the Haida Tlingit and Tsimshian people, but Sugpiaq, Alutiiq, Inupiaq, Yupik, all of us have to agree on what that looks like in order for that to be successful.
Jaylene, we did have a question about how Sealaska might be supporting our Vietnam veterans in their allotments. Can you address that?
Happy to do so. Sealaska has been engaged in the past 2 efforts legislatively to ensure that our Alaska Native veterans who served in Vietnam can get Native allotments, many of whom were serving in Vietnam when the allotment period closed. The initial legislation was passed many years ago, but it was very restrictive in who could apply. The second round of amendments opened it up to the entire Vietnam era. Anybody who was serving during that time could still be eligible to apply who is an Alaska Native. There were amendments again a couple of years ago to further ensure that our Alaska Native veterans could get lands throughout Alaska. Unfortunately, some interest won over in restricting the lands that could be selected. So the lands have to be federal lands that an Alaska Native veteran previously had some tie to, but the legislation recently limited veterans from selecting within national forests, within federal reserves, within certain other protected designations, wildlife refuges. So basically that leaves nothing in Southeast. So we've been working very hard with the delegation, and they're very aware of this. Many of them raised the issue. They agree that the legislation was successful in getting passed, but it wasn't really a win because our veterans haven't been able to select in their homelands. And many of our veterans in Southeast do not want to select outside of their homelands. They don't want to encroach upon the homelands of other Native people. So we continue to push this issue with our delegation. It maintains a top spot on our public policy priority list of the board, and we'll continue to push for that until we can get some adequate reparations for our Native veterans who served in Vietnam. But thank you so much for the question, and we'll continue to work on it.
Thank you, Jaylene. We had some similar questions too about the landless communities and how they go about selecting their parcels. And you made the great point that over time, so many interested parties in the Tongass have already carved out lands that they've selected for municipalities, for boroughs. There are so many land use designations through the United States Forest Service. And the landless communities, we've really just been kind of pushed farther and farther away from land selections around those communities that were meaningful to the people in that area. And so we can only select from federal lands. That's an important thing to distinguish. And the federal lands that are selected, if they are transferred into those urban corporation hands, of course, we would work with partners and communities for best possible uses of that. And I can give an example. Right now, there's federal land. It's a Forest Service old administration building that Cake is interested in converting and building out a culturally grounded recovery and rehabilitation center, which is definitely something we've heard from our shareholders that our communities need. It's federal land now. It happens to lie within a Petersburg landless selection. If that transfer were to happen, of course, we would honor that arrangement. It's important to know that there is so much language in our landless legislation that upholds any existing easements and leases. So there's no threat of anybody, being kicked off of anything if that legislation passes. And just wanted to note that as well. We've got questions here with Lagadoc and Kajuhane. I know that you can add details to this, but we often get questions about Sealaska being recognized as a tribal entity. And this is really important, very important to share with our shareholders. Sealaska has that recognition in over 100 pieces of legislation based on the definition, because we have interests in our lands, our foods, our cultural practices. Sealaska is not trying to set itself in the position of being the sovereign government for our tribal people. That is Tlingit and Haida. We recognize that through resolution at Sealaska. We honor that through our partnership with Tlingit and Haida, but it's very important for Sealaska to have that tribal designation in these pieces of legislation, because for one, that is the mechanism for Sealaska Heritage Institute to get most of its grant funding. So imagine if Sealaska lost that designation, what could happen there? We have to have access to manage our lands appropriately, to control for beetle infestation or for potential wildfire. So I'll stop there, and Jaylene, hopefully you can add some detail.
Yeah, and there is a specific question about NAGPRA. There are no current efforts that I've seen around amending INCSA to or NAGPRA to include INCSA corporations. You're right, there have been efforts in the past, but that's not part of our current list of priorities or any other ANCs that I'm aware of. Nicole's right, there is efforts right now to include us in the Tribal Forest Protection Act. It's interesting because the legislation did include INCSA corporations as tribes, but didn't include tribal forest land to include INCSA land. And there have been issues throughout Alaska on other corporation lands that involve forest fires, and also in Southeast, we've had bug infestations, insect infestations that we'd like to address. The Tribal Forest Protection Act would allow tribes to work with the Forest Service to address those concerns. Currently, we aren't included. And it's critical when there's legislation that deals with Alaska Native land or deals with tribal land or native land, that we have some inclusion so that we can protect our resources. So, but we aren't currently seeking anything in NAGPRA. I know that a lot of our corporations or SHI, for example, try to work with some of the tribes to get some of our artifacts and important resources back through NAGPRA, but we can't do so without working with the tribe at this time, and we don't expect to amend NAGPRA anytime soon. Trying to see if there's any more questions I can help answer at the moment. On the litigation and advocacy, I know that AFN, their subsistence board or committee, recently recommended involvement in the litigation around the Kuskokwim because of the impact on Katie John. And we're supporting those efforts by providing a lot of the background legal work and analysis that we've already done in previous efforts. And I expect it to be a hot topic at the AFN convention in October. But none of this stuff is free. It's costly to pursue litigation. So certainly encourage those on the line to support the efforts by supporting the AFN Subsistence Fund, or even FAI is working on their own litigation fund, which they, I'm very humbled to say, they named in honor of the late Senator Albert Kukash Subsistence Defense Fund, because he was out there fighting the state government when they tried to cite him. So there are ways to support the advocacy and to rally around these efforts that are trying to protect our way of life. And we'll try to keep you updated on those efforts and how you can help on our public policy website. So, but thank you for wanting to provide support, and we'll continue to do our part the best that we can.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jaylene. Well, Gadak, we've had a few questions about working with our partners to make sure that maybe we're not competitive for different types of programs. Can you maybe talk a little bit about, for example, the CARES Act and how funding to corporations in no way diminished the funding that went to tribes, and how we work with our partners, for example, recent conversations we've had with Sitka Tribes of Alaska to make sure that we aren't competing for important grant funds?
Yeah, I don't appreciate that prompt. I think what we need to get through to Congress is often their appropriations, or the money that they set aside for tribes, often has two criteria that they base those dollar amounts on. One of them is how much land do you have, and the other one is what's your population. Well, our tribes they're not the retainers of our land, our corporations are. So if we just based it on those two criteria and they did not include corporations in their definitions, our tribes would essentially get very, very little to no dollars. And that's the case for the CARES litigation. They were basing it on these two criteria that required a land base. And so when we think about what that means for our tribes, and it meant that it was an amazing opportunity during a huge pandemic, which is not our people's first, right? We've been through so many, to work closely with our tribe. And when we received the dollar amount from the CARES Act litigation, or from the CARES Act itself, not the litigation, but from the CARES Act, we gave it to Tlingit and Haida. We said, you've already got a program running. You already know how to take care of our people through this pandemic. Here's the money, like continue to do what you're doing in a good way. And I know, and I will acknowledge that not all regions worked that way. And there's a reason why there's still, a division and an angst out there between corporations and tribes. But I just want to say that we do what we can at Sealaska. I sit as a Tlingit and Haida tribal delegate for Juneau, to make sure that we have a solid understanding that we're the same people, and that when natives fight natives, somebody else is winning, and it's not us. And so we really hold that firm when we engage in any space that could be seen as controversial between our tribes and our corporations. And like I said, having those solid communication lines open on a regular basis and not engaging in a space we know is going to feel like a slap in the face to our entities that care so much for our people is one of our priorities. And I'll also bring in, when it came to a really great recent conversation with Sitka about education dollars and about what that looks like for Sitka and having to compete with, Sealaska Heritage Institute for some of those dollars. We had that. It was the first time we'd heard that conversation from that leadership in Sitka. And we said, okay, what can we do? How can we make this better? And so bringing that to the SHI board and saying, let's have a conversation. If you're going to be applying for these dollars, let's think about how we can make these work for our entire region. Because it shouldn't be a competition. It should be something where we are working together. And there's enough division out there that the world puts against us and forces us to have against one another. And we try our best not to bring that internal and not to carry that forward. If we can prevent it, it's something that we will aim to do. And so, having these conversations, solid communication is definitely key, and working in a way where we don't take ownership of something that we know is a benefit to our community if done through, say, Tlingit and Haida. That it's a better use of resources, a better avenue to be able to do things, and thinking through what are those innovative approaches? What are the ways that we can do better working together? And so I appreciate that comment and that question, because it's an important one, Clarice. Well, and with that, I think we are actually right in line with our time. These were amazing questions. I just want to say how I'm going to sheesh and Deutschen. Thank you all for sticking with us and being here today. And the questions that you have are so important. The ideas, the concepts, the thoughts you have. If you have an issue that you see rising up in our Native community, let us know, so we can think about what that looks like for Sealaska and how we can best help our communities. how we can best do this work so that our people are protected and cared for in the best way that our resources can provide, because these are your resources. And so again, I'll say, Hawa, thank you all for bearing with us while we spent an hour talking. And thank you all for being here and providing your good thoughts. Ladies, did you want to say anything?
Thank you so much, Waslagidak. I do want to acknowledge we have a couple other members of the committee who couldn't join us today because of advocacy obligations. So Lagunai, Liz Medicine Crow, was busy with another meeting, and Jody Mitchell is also fighting for our energy for our communities. So just want to acknowledge a few other committee members and just thankful for the committee. There was a time where we didn't have a committee, and I was kind of out there on my own, pulling directors in, but this is a lot more refined approach that provides a lot of support to our advocacy efforts beyond just me and our management team. So I'm really grateful for this committee. So thank you.
I'll just add my thanks, a huge Ganesh Ha'a for all of our shareholders who joined. And to Jaylene's comment, this policy committee and the work that we're doing, this is such great evidence of what Sealaska is. Sealaska of today and the Sealaska we're looking forward to in the future with our shareholders and our partners. Ganesh Cheese for being engaged and for being with us today. Thanks, everybody.
So we've been here for over 10,000 years, traveling up and down the coast thousands of miles and living on the resources that the sea provides, and using our canoes to get back and forth is really the only way we were able to get around at one point. And so, now bringing that back again feels like such a privilege to be able to experience that.
There's actually very few places on the earth that have as many islands as we do, right. Arranged anything like this. And so I think that the very culture is based in the canoe and, on canoe travel.
I was fortunate enough to actually grow up on the water and understand how I'm connected to each community in Southeast and how we lifted each other up no matter where we came from. And that connection between and why we traveled from community to community in our yak, and how important that was for us to keep our sustainability amongst our clans and our communities.
It's the canoes, the water, the artwork, the language, the songs, everything is together, right?
And this is so exciting to see them coming. They've gained so much benefit from the gift that was made of our trees to them, and now they're trying to bring back that awareness to focus on these communities.
I'm seeing this full circle in my family and in our communities in Southeast, how we're starting to come back again to what worked for us and our people, and how we sustained our families traditionally, but also how it sustained our ecosystem. And that strengthened us, not only mentally, but physically. And that connection, that bond between every community that we visited. So for me, what I want to say to my relatives is Ganesh Cheese for continuing this tradition of coming back to these territories so that we can see, and our relatives and the next generation can see how important these connections are.